Now we're looking at Norway maple. Okay, this is the fourth guitar wood species for maple that is used here in America, and actually it's used all over the world. But a lot of people aren't as familiar with this maple. So this maple, this Janka hardness is slightly harder than red leaf, but not quite as hard as hard maple. It shares a lot of characteristics of hard maple and even red. And I'm going to get to that in a second here. So this wood species was not indigenous to America. It was transplanted, brought here in the year 1756 by an Englishman, John Bartram. And basically we can consider him as a seed salesman. So he showed up in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and he starts selling these seeds to farmers, landowners, and rightfully so, as a shade tree, because it really does. This tree you see here was 43 years old. I counted the rings. It grew 28 inches in diameter, had almost no heart. It was unbelievable. And the figure's just screaming. It was genetic. It was all the way through the tree. So, but before I get into some of the characteristics of this actual wood, let me talk about the tree species itself. This is obviously nobody knew this back then, but before there was air conditioning and fans and electricity, people used to sit under trees in shade and try to get some comfort during the hot summer months. So this was an ideal tree to plant, because within 30, 40 years, you had a big tree with lots of shade. These are big, broad leaves that it grows. It grows very fast. The downside to that is, and people didn't figure this out till later on, is that it's a very invasive species. So it does that in a couple ways. One, it tends to throw off a lot of saplings, and it will literally take over and control a specific area, kind of choking out the local and indigenous maple species or other tree species. The other thing too is it also gives off a neurotoxin to other trees, which keeps them away. So unfortunately, because of that, species that require better high ground, better soil drainage, like hard maples, that's why you don't see as much of the hard maples in certain areas. There's a lot of Norway maple here in the Northeast, a ton. And it's probably the most misidentified maple for those that aren't as familiar, because in its adolescent years, it has very similar bark. The leaves to the untrained eye can be misidentified, but not someone like myself who can pick up on the difference right away. So now let's get into the guitar parts world. So the pros and cons. We already talked about the cons. Let's talk about the pros. So this species is known for tight flame, like angel's hair style flame, which is nice, blistery curl, and I have literally even cut a quilted version, which is really rare. It also shares a lot of the hard maple characteristics, where it's that white, opaque yellow look to it. So it's fairly clean. They generally have smaller hearts, much smaller than red maples, and it has very little cambium worm. For some reason, that board does. It's there, but it prefers red maple over, and even some hard maple over this Norway. So it tends to be a very clean maple. I've been told, and I am not a builder, but this wood is a little bit more difficult when taking a stain. Okay, I've heard this from a handful of people, so don't shoot the messenger. I'm just passing that along. But you'll see here is that the annual ring growth spacing it can be pretty large. This is actually pretty tight for Norway. Norway is notorious for having large growth rings. So in a lot of cases, if you don't get something like this, you have wood that's ideal for building tops, not neck blanks. But all in all, it's strange. So when I manhandle this wood, man, it feels and mills a lot like hard maple. Very similar. Very heavy, hard, and dense, but yet it's only a little bit harder than red. So I don't know. That's just my professional take on this wood. It's a unique species all around, and when I get the opportunity to cut it, I do. because it's an invasive species, but in general, this maple really does have a pretty high percentage of trees that have genetic figure. And the trees that you see here were saplings of a parent tree, and they all had figure. And the landowner did not want to kill the parent tree because the parent tree was just absolutely gorgeous. It was a perfect conical tree. Just absolutely gorgeous. So these trees here grew fast and big. There was one, this one here. This one here, it was nuts. The tree was only 16 inches in diameter. It was only 30 years old, and it had amazing figures. That figure was right out of the gate. So I know a lot of people say, well, it sways in the wind, and okay, that's possible. I don't have a true answer on that, but what I can tell you for a fact, that if the saplings came from a parent tree that had genetic figure, the saplings will have figure. And I know in a lot of cases, it doesn't take a long time for that tree to generate that genetic figure. It does it at an early age. Okay? All right, so this is Norway maple.